Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to discuss another interesting topic, and that is failure demand. A lot of people talk about AI and automation as if the main issue is simply AI making mistakes. But honestly, I think that framing misses out on a big problem, and that is not necessarily that failure exists because systems do fail occasionally, and humans do as well. Um, the real problem is what happens when institutions are designed in a way that where failure becomes the operating model itself. And I think one of the most important concepts to understand here is something that's called failure demand. Failure demand is work that only exists because the system failed in the first place. So, for example, that might mean repeated calls, appeals, complaints, legal disputes, reassessments, escalations, manual interventions, people contacting completely unrelated departments or institutions for help, or people trying to bypass systems entirely just to speak to a human being. And that work should not exist under normal functioning conditions. And this is where I think a lot of institutions fundamentally misunderstand what they're measuring, because they often measure themselves in isolation. So, for example, one department says, we reduce costs, we reduce staff, automated support, and process goes faster. But systems do not exist in isolation. No institution exists in isolation. No human being exists in isolation, and failure doesn't happen in isolation either. So when one system fails a person, the need doesn't disappear. The person still needs support. The patient still needs medication. The citizen still needs help. And the problem still exists inside the same society, inside the same economy, and the same network of institutions. So what happens instead is that the burdens gets redistributed. People are calling unrelated departments, they contact advocacy groups, they escalate legally, they rely on emergency services, they require social workers, they enter crisis situations, and other institutions become overloaded trying to compensate for the original dysfunction. So the institution thinks it saved money, but in reality it exported the cost somewhere else. And often the total cost becomes much larger than if the system had simply functioned correctly in the first place. And this is, in a nutshell, what failure demand is. And I think that disability systems are one of the clearest examples of that kind of occurrence, because take system where people are repeatedly rejected despite being legitimately disabled. So what happens is that the case is not resolved. The person's needs do not disappear. So instead, the person is forced into appeals, reassessments, legal challenges, advocacy pathways, emotional exhaustion, and sometimes years of administrative survival. And now the institution has created a completely different kind of loop. Because a health system usually has a measurable cycle. Case is opened, the issue is handled, the case is resolved, and maintenance happens over time. So that's a functional loop. It has a beginning and an ending. But a dysfunctional system creates something else entirely. And in a sense, it is a self-destructive loop because the issue is never truly resolved. The institution spends increasing amounts of energy defending itself from the consequences of its own dysfunction. Appeals accumulate, distrust accumulates, administrative complexity accumulates, human suffering accumulates, and eventually the institution becomes more focused on defending itself than fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. And at that point, the system starts behaving almost like an autoimmune disease. So imagine like an autoimmune system attacking the very body it is supposed to protect. And This is where also AI and automation can become extremely dangerous when implemented carelessly, because AI systems are usually optimized for narrow categories, predictable inputs, and measurable outputs. But human beings are not narrow categories, and there are edge cases constantly: disability, neurodivergence, language barriers, trauma, chronic illness, complex life situations, stress, poverty, etc. And this is why I think accessibility is not just an ethical issue, it is a systems issue. Because systems that continuously fail people create instability everywhere else around them. And eventually institutions that become trapped in self-defensive failure loops begin destroying the very reason for their own existence. And this is the paradox, that the attempt to save cost through dysfunction often creates far greater long-term cost, financially, administratively, and socially, and humanly as well. And I think the discussion about AI and bureaucracy and institutional design is not only in terms of efficiency, but also in terms of sustainability, because a system that stops serving humans ultimately and eventually stop being sustainable at all. So hope that was interesting. Hope that you learned something new today, and thank you. Take care.